The show begins with what seems like an earthquake or tremor shaking the Kinloch Bravo oil rig. Baz Roberts, a young and relatively inexperienced crew member, is playing a video game with a colleague. Rose Mason, a geologist and the representative of Pictor, the company that owns the rig, interrupts to announce a new transfer. Eager to leave the rig, Baz jokes with Rose, hoping to secure a seat on the departing chopper. Meanwhile, Magnus McMillan, the crew leader, receives troubling news. The inland operational headquarters isn't responding, leaving the helicopter's arrival time uncertain. After the call, Rose enters his office and finds him engrossed in a confidential letter. Magnus informs Rose about a call from the Horde regarding a diversion, disrupting the crew's downtime. Longman, another crew member, questions the loud video game Baz is playing. Baz explains that the rig's isolation has driven him to seek distraction through video games. Later, Baz approaches Alwyn Evans, an older and more experienced crew member, to discuss a disciplinary issue. However, breaks the bad news that Baz has been unexpectedly bumped from the departing helicopter, meaning he'll be staying on the rig for a few more days. At the same time, Fulmer Hamilton, the radio and communications officer, struggles with technical difficulties as he tries to reach Pictor. Magnus then calls Fulmer to the briefing room. Meanwhile, Kat Braithwaite, the rig's medic, is attempting to have a conversation on her computer but is reminded that the group briefing is about to begin. As Lars Hutton, a long-serving crew member, approaches Baz, he learns that Baz has been replaced on the departing helicopter. Simultaneously, Magnus addresses the crew, informing them of a reported power failure on a nearby oil rig, which has caused helicopters in their sector to be diverted for evacuation purposes. Further adds to the crew's frustration by mentioning that the phone lines are down, preventing them from contacting their families to inform them of the change in plans. The crew is also puzzled about why Baz was bumped from the helicopter in favor of Fulmer. Rose clarifies the situation, explaining that the company requested an experienced radio operator to be released for a critical liaison meeting, and she selected Fulmer for the task. Baz objects, but Rose reminds him that Pictor's requirements supersede the helicopter rota due to contractual obligations. However, their conversation is abruptly interrupted as the lights begin to flicker. Taking charge of the situation, Magnus initiates blackout recovery procedures. Meanwhile, Fulmer receives alarming news: all the generators are down, and the battery backup has just kicked in. The situation worsens as they discover they cannot restart the oil digging well. When venturing outside, Owen notices a disturbing development: the rig's rails are shaking violently. Magnus reacts swiftly, instructing the crew to contact the standby vessel for potential assistance. Unfortunately, Fulmer's attempt to contact anyone is thwarted by a malfunctioning radio. The situation intensifies as Owen calls Magnus to report that the safety systems have activated due to a surge in pressure. With no other option, Magnus decisively orders Owen to shut down the rig. As power flickers back to life, Rose questions Magnus about the urgency of shutting down the well, as she doesn't want to lower the oil production quota. Owen receives instructions to send a crew to inspect the module. Rose remains unconvinced, arguing that the safety systems would have prevented any problems. Magnus, however, emphasizes the importance of adhering to protocol to avoid potential casualties. Elsewhere, Fulmer delivers a sobering update: while some power has been restored, the radio remains inoperable. Given the uncertainty, Magnus prioritizes the safety of the standby vessel, instructing them to take shelter until the cause of the incident is identified. Faced with the communication blackout, Magnus inquires about alternative methods of contacting the vessel. Fulmer suggests using flags and informs Magnus that the best reception for the satellite phone is on the helipad. Determined to investigate a possible connection to their operational base, Magnus volunteers to make the trek alone. However, Magnus observes a thick fog approaching in the distance, and soon afterward, the rig is quickly enveloped by the dense mist. All the crew members rush back inside as the possibility of any helicopter departures in such visibility becomes zero. He returns from the helipad unsuccessful in getting the satellite phone to work. He relays the news to Fulmer, who confirms that internal communication is functioning, but external channels are down. While Magnus ponders the possibility of a seismic event, Owen suggests they might be experiencing the Earth's retaliation for their drilling activities. Rose dismisses this theory, citing their safe distance from fault lines. Meanwhile, Fulmer seeks permission to check the communications tower. Rose expresses reservations due to the hazardous conditions, but Magnus makes a decision to send Baz up with Fulmer despite Hutton's vehement objections about safety risks. Magnus defends his choice, highlighting the potential rewards of restoring communication versus the dangers of inaction. Hutton gives Baz the option to refuse, but the lure of regaining his helicopter seat proves too strong. Magnus even sweetens the deal by offering his own seat if Baz succeeds in fixing the issue. With determination, Baz begins to climb up the ladder, closely followed by Fulmer. When they reach the helipad, Fulmer works on the equipment while offering Baz an explanation as to why he was chosen instead of Baz. He reveals that Rose selected him for the task based on company orders. Baz counters that currying favor with Rose won't make a difference when cutbacks begin, a scenario Hutton believes is imminent. He claims that company representatives never stay for long, suggesting Rose will quickly move on to new opportunities, leaving Fulmer behind. Once again, Fulmer's anger flares, and he shoves Baz against the railing, demanding why Baz gets to decide who belongs. Relief washes over them as Fulmer successfully repairs the equipment. As Fulmer prepares to descend, Baz accidentally drops the voltmeter. Deciding to leave Baz behind, Fulmer makes his way down. Minutes later, the comm is shattered by a horrifying sight. Baz's body drops from the helipad and crashes on the ground. Magnus screams for help, and Rose rushes to the scene. Fulmer climbs down, claiming Baz was following him down, but Hutton confronts Fulmer, demanding the truth about what transpired. Kat quickly assesses Baz's condition and discovers he is still alive. The crew then springs into action to help him. Meanwhile, Magnus assigns Fulmer a critical task: establish communication with the shore at all costs. Rose presents Magnus with another alarming discovery: a complete loss of pressure in the oil-digging pipelines. This incident appears to be part of a larger problem affecting other locations. With urgency, Magnus orders Fulmer to prioritize getting the pipelines back online. Inside the makeshift medical bay, Kat treats Baz's injuries while Lars reacts with emotional turmoil. Kat acknowledges her limitations. Baz's internal injuries are beyond their capabilities on the rig, and surgery is out of the question. Their role is to stabilize him and ensure his comfort until transfer is possible. Lars, overwhelmed by the situation, lashes out and storms out. BN expresses hope that Lars will come to terms with this situation, but Kat remains skeptical. Faced with radio silence from the Coast Guard, Fulmer is overcome with despair. Rose offers words of comfort, reminding him that Baz's slip on the ascent should have been a warning sign. Fulmer confides in Rose about Baz's accusations regarding her loyalty to the company and potential layoffs. Rose reassures him with a kiss, placing no blame on him for the accident. Later that night, while nobody is watching, Baz stirs and experiences a vision of what transpired underwater. Outside, Hutton confronts Magnus, demanding he take action to get Baz medical attention. He suggests contacting the Navy or securing a helicopter at any cost. Their exchange escalates into an argument, with Hutton placing blame on Magnus for ordering Baz to go up the tower. After Magnus walks away, Hutton stumbles upon the confidential letter that was addressed to Magnus. Hutton observes the crew heading upwards and stays behind to speak with Kat about Hutton's erratic behavior. Meanwhile, Magnus expresses his concerns to Rose about venturing outside without confirmation of safety. He inquires about Fulmer's emotional state, acknowledging that even after years of working together, people can keep hidden depths. Agnes observes that critical situations reveal a person's true values and beliefs. Rose is surprised to learn about established procedures for getting stuck offshore. However, Magnus highlights a more pressing issue: the lack of work and purpose, leading the crew to dwell on what they're missing. Their conversation is cut short by news of a commotion on the helipad instigated by Hutton. Lars accuses Magnus and the crew of lying about the situation, claiming it's more than just fog and bad weather. He throws suspicion at Magnus, believing Baz was sent up the tower out of fear of something lurking beneath the rig. Hutton demands transparency from Magnus, urging him to reveal the truth. He then throws a wrench into the situation by revealing the contents of the confidential letter. Hutton begins to read the document aloud, learning about the planned decommission of several crew members on the rig. Magnus cuts him short, confirming their worst fears: Pictor is shutting down the entire field. Magnus explains the company's reasoning: they didn't want the news to trigger a mass exodus before they were prepared to initiate decommissioning. He assures the crew that his priority remains getting them home safely. As they look up, a startling sight disrupts the conversation: ash falling from the sky. With ash flying in the fog all around, a battered and gruesomely injured Baz climbs to the top and claims that something has started to happen. In the next scene, Baz opens his eyes in the clinic as Kat Braithwaite and Rose Mason stand near him. They are stunned to see a man who had just fallen several feet on mesh steel is talking normally. Suddenly, though, his demeanor changes, and he becomes ferocious when Kat tries to take a blood sample. As Rose and Kat struggle to restrain him, Baz is terrified, and he screams about a wave coming. At the manager's cabin, Magnus and Grant Dunlin, the safety officer, discuss the situation. Having been colleagues for over 2 decades, Dunlin feels betrayed that Magnus never alerted him about the decommissioning that's about to happen. Back in the clinic, Baz is awake, and he undoes the bandage on his arm. Miraculously, a wound where the bone and muscles were sticking out has almost healed. Coincidentally, Heather and OLN talk about Baz in the rec room, where OLN admits that he'd never thought that Baz would walk again. Suddenly, the crew spots the lights from a standby vessel out in the sea that's signaling to the rig. Elle heads out to the helipad to note down the signals as Fulmer translates. The message is a pan or possible assistance needed over and over again. The signal has also caught the eye of Hutton, who appears to be on cabin arrest, as the crane operator Easter stands outside his cabin. As OLN narrates to Heather about the time when Elle almost froze to death in a crash 2 years earlier, Elle is already shivering on the helipad, covered in ashes and chilled to the bone. As for Baz, he's far from normal. His left eye that had been destroyed in the fall has healed, and he seems physically mobile. Mentally, however, that's a different matter. Something is happening inside his body that makes him throw up his tooth filling. While Magnus, Rose, and Fulmer discuss the decommissioning, an issue that's been plaguing everyone, Kat rushes in to inform them that Baz is missing. OLN finds him in a cabin, making weird symbols against the window and talking nonsense. Meanwhile, Elle is freezing and needs to warm up, so he turns to the best way he knows how, alcohol. In an oil rig where the crew needs to be ready for any and every emergency, alcohol for recreational purposes isn't a usual item, so La tiptoes into Kat's clinic and siphons off some rubbing alcohol. He takes a few swigs and steps into the shower, but when he takes his clothes off, weird things start to happen. His tattoos wash off in the water as his eyes, palms, and body start to bleed. La screams in pain as blood continues flowing out of his pores, while Hutton makes his escape through the cabin window. Soon afterward, Heather walks in with Lee's dinner to find him dead in the shower. The cause of his death remains unknown, but Dunlin finds Baz's fillings in his cabin. Agnes and Rose theorize that those who have been exposed to the ash in the air have been infected by the substance, and it's the substance's presence that's cleaning the bodies of objects it considers impurities. This explains why Baz's inorganic fillings came out and why Lee's tattoos washed off. Additionally, it's quite possible that La died bleeding and clutching his stomach in pain because the substance in the ash was rejecting the rubbing alcohol he ingested. Spotting a torchlight on the deck, Alwyn and Fulmer go down to the deck where the latter cuts his hand on the lifeboat door. Unbeknownst to the two, Hutton slips inside the cabin and goes straight for the communications room to signal SOS to the standby vessel, a tactical mistake, as the zero visibility will cause the standby vessel to crash into the rig. Fulmer returns after struggling with the door, and Magnus, Dunlin, Fulmer, and Rose confront Hutton in the radio room. A scuffle almost breaks out between Fulmer and Hutton when Hutton makes pointed remarks about Fulmer and Rose's secret relationship. Thankfully, they are broken off by Magnus. Following this, Fulmer frantically signals the standby vehicle to change course to avoid colliding. They remember that Alwyn is still down there, so Magnus orders Alwyn to come back up. But Alwyn spots Baz on the deck and rushes to bring him to safety. Dunlin arrives just in time at the deck to see Baz choking Alwyn. Before he can step in, Alwyn spits water from his mouth and falls down dead as Baz escapes. Soon afterward, a distraught Magnus pleads with Alwyn's lifeless body to stay with him as he performs CPR, but to no avail. Later, Rose informs Magnus that the particles inside the ash are living organisms that act like parasites, invading a host and driving out its impurities. Containment becomes another major concern that plagues the overwhelmed manager, who is already burdened with the issues of a stranded crew, broken communications, a shortage of food, and 2 dead crewmates. It's theorized that anyone who was exposed to the ash for a long period of time or who sustained cuts or injuries needs to be put under observation. A montage of a worried Fulmer flexing his injured hand plays, then changes to a scene of Baz sitting on the stairs with a mean coldness in his eyes. In the following scene, Baz screams as he begs for an answer from the voices that keep howling inside his head, and visions of him murdering Alwyn haunt him. Meanwhile, Rose is still vehemently supporting Pictor and doesn't yet wish to see the company that will be decommissioning her crewmates as villains. Apart from asserting that her goal is to make the change to take the company towards a greener future, Rose also decides that the best way to separate the infected from the ones who are not is by drawing blood and comparing it with the sample that had been drawn from Baz. Fulmer's hand wound puts him under suspicion, and his relationship with Rose is strained as well. Inside the rec room, situations worsen as Hutton keeps taunting the crew. When Heather announces that the fog is clearing up, with the visibility improved, the crew notices smoke billowing from the Kinloch Charlie, indicating that the rig has caught fire or an explosion has happened. Fulmer walks in on Baz going through the medical reports inside the clinic, and the latter escapes with his blood sample before either Fulmer or Rose can apprehend him. In the briefing room, it's decided that the deck areas shall be cleaned as the fog has moved away and the ash has stopped flying. 2 teams of 3 members each are assembled as a search party and are tasked with looking for Baz. He is seen in the production module where he disposes of his blood sample into the sea, and as if all the events haven't been weird enough, Baz waves his hands over canisters of oil, and miniature plants start forming over the surface. Elsewhere, Rose discovers that the ash particles are 300 million years old and belong to the Permian period, and it's the same oil that Pictor Energy has been drilling into all this time. Interestingly, the Permian period caused a massive extinction of 95% of all living organisms on Earth and is known as the Great Dying. In the module, Hutton and Dunlin walk in to find G wounded, another victim of Baz, but it turns out that Gerald has crossed over to the other side as he runs away into the darkness. Suddenly, a massive tremor begins, causing the crew to lose their balance and adding to the chaos. Heather is isolated from her group and is looking for her mates when she stumbles upon an area where greenery is growing. It's an oil rig in the middle of the sea, yet inside it, ferns, bushes, and grass are taking root. As Heather navigates this strange environment, she suddenly comes face to face with Baz, joined by Gerald. Although neither of them seems harmful, Baz talks about having seen the landscape that existed millions of years ago and how everything here is heading toward its death. Unexpectedly, Hutton arrives to Heather's rescue, flashing lights on the 2 men, seemingly a weakness for those who have turned, and helps Heather escape. But no sooner is one issue sorted out than another pops up on the rig, and this time it's the ignition system, a critical problem. The ignition system is responsible for burning off harmful gases and substances released by the rig, and unless it's functioning, the crewmates will be poisoned. Hutton suggests an old-school solution for fixing a jammed ignition system, shooting a flare at it. Before straws can be drawn to select a person for the task, Fulmer volunteers, probably to prove to the crew that he's not joining Baz and Gerald yet and maybe to earn back Rose's affection. Fulmer is primed into position to shoot the flare, but he's struck by sudden inspiration. He looks back at the crew and starts crossing the thin ledge, inching toward the ignition system to ensure he doesn't miss. He then shoots, but before he can pick up speed, he's hit by the shockwave and falls down unconscious. Rose is beside herself in terror as Kat starts treating him. Fortunately, he survives, thanks to his fire-resistant jacket, though he suffers some bad burns on his back and arms. He regains consciousness to find Rose watching him with concern in her eyes, and she admonishes him for his actions, though not too sternly. Inside the module, Baz finally understands that the well injection is the device harming the underwater entities, and he decides that the instrument must be shut down. A montage of the injection reaching the depths of the ocean plays before cutting to black. Elsewhere, Baz and Gerald mess around with the well injection to undo its connection to the seafloor. Fulmer wakes up to find Rose sitting near him, and although he's badly burned, he'll live. Outside, Kat, Heather, and Rose discuss the parasites in the ash and conclude that it might be some bacteria that has managed to stay alive for millions of years and could be the ancestor of all life. Suddenly, Kat blurts out that she's pregnant, dropping a bombshell on the other 2 women. Inside the laboratory, Rose notes that the spores might be using a method called quorum sensing to communicate with Baz. Quorum sensing is a physiological way by which bacteria talk to each other, allowing them to coordinate and cause diseases in other organisms. Meanwhile, Fulmer seems intent on drawing circular patterns, which are later revealed to be the same weird circles that Baz had been drawing on the window panes earlier. While this is happening, Magnus calls Dunlin and Rose to the control room, with Fulmer and Heather in their wake, as the pressure in the rig spirals out of control. The only option is to send a remote-operated vehicle to shut down the rig manually. After some intense deliberation, Easter is called in to operate the vehicle to the bottom of the sea. But something on the seabed freaks them out. Concentric rings seem to have appeared around the pipe burrowed into the seafloor, and they resemble the drawings that Fulmer and Baz have made. Even Fulmer stares intently into the circles. Inside the module, Baz and Gerald are at their wits' end, struggling with the complexity of the well injector. They decide to call Fulmer to help with their objective. Probably due to the fog clearing, the signal returns, and Rose starts looking up the samples of the bacteria when something called Project Siren comes up. Meanwhile, Kat contacts her wife Casey, who informs her that the fog has flown in, but before she can warn her not to go outside, the signal drops again. Trying to access the files is a fruitless endeavor, as Rose's security clearance proves insufficient for this new finding. Even her highest level of security isn't enough to access these files. Rose suspects something very abnormal is happening. While searching for possible passwords, she discovers the drawings made by Fulmer. Instead of alerting everyone, she chooses to remain quiet. Meanwhile, despite being tasked with establishing contact with the beach, Fulmer becomes distracted by researching how circles can be used to communicate. He's interrupted when he hears Baz speaking to him. Later, Rose walks in on Fulmer examining his wounds, which have already begun to heal. The burn scar on his wrist has completely disappeared, indicating that the spores have seeped into his body. Fulmer admits that he's started hearing and seeing Baz, and it's clear he's terrified. In the briefing room, multiple arguments break out as everyone becomes desperate to return home. News that the fog has reached land sends the crew into a panic, with the safety of their loved ones now their top priority. Hutton picks a fight with Kat, and they nearly come to blows when Heather reveals she's pregnant, screaming for Hutton to let go of her. Seeing this, Magnus tries to explain that his crew's safety has always been his top concern, which is why he didn't go home years ago, but he trails off before mentioning that's how his son died. Dunlan and Rose attend to Magnus and send him off to get some much-needed rest, with Rose taking charge. Rose announces that she's no longer with Pictor Energy and stands with the crew. The deaths of crewmates, an unknown bacterium attacking people, and being stranded in the middle of nowhere have caused her to have a change of heart. She returns to Fulmer's room but finds no trace of him, only a note expressing his concern for her safety, his reason for leaving. With her world crumbling around her, Kat stands on the rails, only to spot Fulmer heading toward the production module. Kat and Rose chase after him and enter the module to find greenery covering everything and strange spores floating in the air. However, instead of being harmful, the spores gently gather near Kat's stomach. Rose quickly takes Kat outside, and although both women are shaken, they remain unharmed. As the story draws to a close, there's excitement on the deck as the crew spots a light far away, hopeful that a rescue mission is on its way. However, the old seafarer Murchison isn't entirely convinced. The crew gets into their life jackets, preparing to be taken away from the rig and all its problems. If you want more daily movie recap, there are 3 things you need to do. 1. Like this video. 2. Share this video with others. 3. Subscribe to the channel and smash the notifications bell so you'll be notified as soon as a new video drops. Until next time, keep grinding, and I'll see you at the top.